I'd like to share with you some new items that I've just added to my collection and show their significance in the ongoing story of why we read Dickens. I've just received these three fragile and very rare items won in an eBay auction. They're the first monthly parts that I've ever owned of the first cheap edition of Dickens's works. But before I describe them in detail, let me put them in context. In the early part of Dickens's career, his novels were issued in monthly parts, like these, at the cost of £1 a month. Complete novels, such as Nickleby, Pickwick or Dombey, could then be made up from the 20 parts and turned into a book, like this. Dickens claimed, in a text produced to advertise the launch of the cheap edition, that this was already a huge saving to intending purchasers compared with the standard way of issuing books in the mid-1830s. Books, it must be remembered, were still luxury items, and for huge numbers of people, owning new books was way beyond their means. To give you an idea of relative cost, a day labourer might earn 4 or 5 shillings for 10 hours work, whilst a clerk might earn £2 or £3 a week. On such wages, the purchase of a book at 20 shillings, even spread across 20 months, represented a significant outlay. Meanwhile, the standard pay for a full-time domestic servant was £16 a year, whilst a live-in maid received just £6 a year, making the cost of a £1 book equivalent to 2 months' wages. The idea of the cheap edition, launched in 1847, was to make Dickens's back catalogue of titles, the copyrights to which were jointly owned by Chapman and Hall and the author, available at much lower prices, democratising the possibility of book ownership. The plan was to reprint each book piecemeal in weekly numbers. Each number comprised just one sheet of paper, folded 3 times to make 16 pages, printed in double columns and uncut. And the cost of this was just a penny halfpenny, 1/160th of a pound or 1/8 of a shilling. Novels were built up of 30 or 40 weekly numbers, or else could be purchased as slightly larger monthly parts, like this, comprising 64 pages and 4 weekly numbers, sewn in blue paper covers and on sale for 7p. A complete novel such as Pickwick could now be purchased in this format for as little as 4 shillings, 1/5 of the cost of the original novel, and for an extra shilling could be bound up in an attractive case like this. The particular parts that I managed to buy are 3 of the 5 monthly parts to Sketches by Boz, issued in the autumn of 1850. You can see on the cover of part 5 the earlier titles in the series and a note at the top that this completes the cheap reissue of Mr. Dickens's works. If we take a look inside, we can see that the last weekly number is made up of the preliminary pages for binding up as a book, a newly commissioned frontispiece by George Cruikshank, the title page, a new preface by the author, and a detailed table of contents. Despite the publisher's claim that the series would end with this part, it was continued 2 years later with the addition of the Christmas books, and a further 9 titles followed between 1858 and 1867, making this a complete set of Dickens's works to date, published over a 20-year period. It was the first collected Dickens available to readers of modest means. Dickens was always concerned to provide quality reading material for the masses at the lowest possible price, whether through his weekly journals or through cheap editions of his own novels. This was the beginning of Dickens for the people. Novels at 5 shillings a volume, followed by the aptly named People's Edition of the mid-1860s, 2 volumes at 4 shillings, and then the Charles Dickens edition, issued just before the author's death at 3 and 6p a volume. Subsequently, Chapman and Hall were able to lower prices still further, and after 3 shilling, 2-shilling and shilling editions, once the books fell out of copyright, a 6-penny Dickens was available at the turn of the century. Why do we still read Dickens? Because he's such a great writer, of course, but also because his books have always been available in such a wide variety of affordable formats, never having been allowed to go out of print ever since the 1840s. And it was this, the cheap edition in parts, which began the process of making Dickens's works a basic building block in even the most modest of home libraries. And it was of great importance in helping to establish Dickens as the most popular and the most enduring of Victorian novelists.